So I need a little treat for the gang, something to win their affections back.
All right, well, why don't we put together an Art 101 about post-impressionism?
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
Hello, scholars, and welcome back to another episode of Art 101 with me, Mr. Burgher. I'm a professional artist, master educator, who's going to attempt to provide you the best in art historical content. If you like the video, please like, share, subscribe, interact. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Welcome to the party. Everybody have their Kool-Aid?
No, okay, you know what? That's inappropriate. What is wrong with you guys? What is wrong with you?
Art is forever evolving, like business or anything else. And one of the things that happened after the Impressionists was the advent of the post-impressionists. There were four artists in particular that stepped up to create a new, unique way of looking at art, a new approach to creating art, but kind of in the same line, but very much an evolution. So today, as you know, because you clicked on the video, we're going to look at that evolution. We're going to look at four artists that would reshape the direction of art, kind of change a little bit of the trajectory of art after Impressionism. So here we go. There are a lot of art teachers and art historians that talk about post-impressionism, but what exactly is post-impressionism? Well, basically it's a collection of artists from France that were making work from 1886 to 1905 that had a unified interest in their art making. Now, what was that unification? It was basically creating emotional and psychological reflections of our world. It's a group that went beyond the first impression, like the Impressionists, and they saw it through a little bit more abstracted lens, but this more psychological style of art was not named until 1910. Now, we can think of post-impressionism kind of like a table. There are four basic legs of this art table that allow the whole thing to stand up. And each leg of that art table has an artist that represents what it really did in creating this reformation of Impressionism through post-impressionism. So, the four art areas are Pointillism or neo-impressionism, Protocubism, Symbolism, and Expressionism. Now, we will talk about each one of the leaders of these groups. For example, we'll talk about George Seurat's leadership in creating Pointillism or neo-impressionism. We'll examine Paul Cézanne's influence on Protocubism. We'll see how Paul Gauguin would help create Symbolism. And lastly, we'll better understand how Vincent van Gogh created the ideas of Expressionism.
I'm gonna play this here share the wealth card.
Ooh. So first and foremost, let's jump in straight away and talk a little bit about Pointillism or neo-impressionism through artist George Seurat. From a young age, he developed an interest in studying color theory and was very much interested in the science of optics. He would study the color theories of Ogden Rood, who had discovered, among other things, that color will look differently depending upon the colors that are next to it. And as he began to pick up some skills in painting, he decided that he wanted to fuse Rood's color ideas along with his passion for painting. This work was very scientific and very mathematical, and although it went by several other names, Pointillism is the name that kind of stuck. This is a technique of taking dots of painted color, placing them next to each other, and allowing the observer's eye to do the mixing. His ideas would build up to very large canvas paintings. One of his most known and recognized of these large works was A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. He would begin this project in the summer of 1884, and it took him over 200 sketches and studies to begin to create this work. Now, unlike the Impressionists, post-impressionists didn't necessarily have to be on location or uphold to doing their work strictly on location. So the studies were done on location, but the actual work itself was created in a studio. and the world would first see this work at the 1886 Impressionist show in Paris. He would apply this same technique to many other artworks that he would create over his very short lifetime. In mid-1889, nearing the age of 30, he would choose to isolate himself in a new studio. The studio's location was not told to his friends or family. Kinda weird, but he felt like he had a good reason.
I wish I had a lair.
Many thought that he might be working on some sort of secret art project or something, but no, not really. He was moving into a new space with his model, Madeleine Nablache, who was pregnant with their child, and their son, Pierre Georges, but refused to introduce the child or his girlfriend to his own mother. Just 2 days before his death, Seurat would introduce them to his mother. Well, how did that happen? He had contracted meningitis and died at the age of 32, but most felt that he had literally worked himself to death, and his son would die shortly after. But his work would have a very profound influence on art, leading out of Impressionism into post-impressionism and beyond that. Other artists would work in this style as well. Other artists include Paul Signac, Georges Lemon, and Anna Bosch.
I just came from the museum where I saw an exhibit.
The leader of the post-impressionist style of Protocubism was Paul Cezanne, a major innovator and influencer of modern art. Now, Protocubism is the prototype or the beginning point of what would become the innovation of Cubism a few years down the road by Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. Eventually in his career, Cezanne would take off for Paris, and he would apply and be rejected by most of the art schools in Paris because he was largely seen as some sort of a country bumpkin. But this was a personal characteristic that he played up a little bit too. But it's safe to say that he was kind of an odd fella anyway. In those early times in Paris, he would spend quite a considerable amount of time at the Louvre, where he would make copies of the famous artworks, especially being influenced by the works of Peter Paul Rubens, as well as Eugène Delacroix.
Where does it end with you people?
But he was one that refused to compromise his artistic style and direction of his work. He would create work for the French salon that he knew would be rejected. And although he was rejected, he would be learning all the while through these experiences. In 1863, he would become involved in the ring of artists that would become known as the Impressionists when he was invited to be a part of the Salon des Refusés. Later in 1874, he would be a part of their first exhibition where he had 3 paintings in that show, and he was very much seen as an impressionist, although he was only in that show as well as the show in 1877. At any rate, on the rare occasion that he painted with other folks, he would usually paint with his friend, teacher, and mentor, Camille Pissarro. And he would say about Pissarro, he was a father to me, someone to turn to for advice, not unlike the good Lord himself. However, Cezanne did prefer to paint in isolation, and he did tend to be a little bit protective of his privacy, even at the peak of his fame. He didn't really like having a lot of people around that he didn't know. There were times that he was known for getting violently upset by people that crossed the line between his public and private lives. He was also known to be a little bit insecure about his ability, and was so convinced that he was unwanted as an artist that he would abandon his paintings out in the wilderness when he had finished painting them. But he would paint in a patchwork style where colors were not blended but just simply laid next to each other, very similar to the Pointillists, but more in a block-type fashion, allowing one's eye to do the mixing and blending of the colors. There would be a number of artists that would also participate in this style, including Ferdinand Liger, Alexander Archipenok, and Robert Delaunay.
That is totally inappropriate.
Now, symbolism was more of a reaction against realism than it was really a direct offshoot of Impressionism. Now, we can see this art form taking shape in many of the arts, in theater, music, literature. For example, Edgar Allan Poe was a very symbolic poet from the United States, and in the visual arts, the leader of symbolism very much was Paul Gauguin. He was a master of using symbols to repeat his opinions and his feeling for the society as a whole. He started painting it more as a hobby than anything and would eventually decide to leave his career as a stockbroker, leaving his wife and 5 children to go out and become a painter.
Boy, have you lost your mind, because I'll help you find it.
He began to work for different art galleries, including an art gallery that was managed by Theo van Gogh, who was the younger brother of Vincent. Theo would convince Paul to become a part of Vincent's artist colony in southern France, and the idea was that Paul would become the director of the colony, and this would be a complete disaster. But at any rate, one of Paul Gauguin's more popular symbolist paintings was the Yellow Christ. As we see, the landscape is not authentically a holy place, but in the area around Brittany, France. The idea that drove Gauguin to make this painting was not so much about religion, but more about his admiration for the women in the area in regards to their faith. Christ's suffering is explained to them through their visions. Thus, this is a representation of their visions. When we look at the face of Christ, it does have a bit of a resemblance to the artist himself, which may be a little bit of an ego issue, which Paul Gauguin definitely had. And it is also claimed that he painted this particular work with so much yellow as a gesture of respect to his friend Vincent van Gogh, because as most of us know now, that Vincent's favorite color was yellow. Anyway, his influence and his artwork in terms of symbolism cannot be questioned. Other symbolism artists would also include Gustave Moreau, Edvard Munch, and Gustav Klimt.
That's not how it works. Now, how do you know how it works?
The lead expressionist artist was none other than Vincent van Gogh, an artist that we've talked about many times on Art 101 with Mr. Burgher. So as I go forward, I'm going to attempt not to repeat myself. But anyway, an expressionist is an impressionist that focuses on feelings that are communicated through their works. And this is something that we see time and time again in the work of Vincent van Gogh. For example, when he commits himself into an insane asylum, he was no longer allowed to go out into the wilderness. He was no longer allowed to go out at night and do his paintings at night, which he had done time and time again. One painting that he did at night was Starry Night over the Rhone. But again, knowing that he wasn't allowed to do that anymore, he creates another version of this simply called Starry Night. And he creates this from memory. He creates this by looking out of the window that he had in his bedroom there. And he's putting his emotions right there on the canvas for us to see.
Whew. The plants are gonna love this.
Yeah.
We see him putting his mood into paintings like Wheat Field with Crows, where a lot of people put this idea of his anger and psychological issues into this particular painting. And largely because of the movie Lust for Life by Kirk Douglas back in the 1950s, it was largely believed that Wheat Field with Crows was his last painting, although it wasn't. His last painting was a painting done of roots, but I digress. The point is that he put his emotions into his canvases. He put his feelings out there for others to see and witness. And this is an art movement that would inspire generations of artists moving forward. Most directly, he influenced the idea of Fauvism, which developed in 1905, and soon after German Expressionism from 1905 to 1913. But other artists that followed along with Vincent van Gogh's Expressionism would include Egon Schiele, Ernst Kirchner, and Otto Dix.
I'm really proud of you.
Without question, these artists and these styles of art creation very much influenced the direction of art post-impressionism. And it is very safe to say that art would not be what it is today without their influence, without their production, without their work. Because just about everything that was done in the 20th century began with their influence. Love bringing you that story. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tagging along. Hopefully you appreciate that. We'll see you on the next one. You have a great day out there.
You know what I think we should do? I think we should just save the goodbyes for tomorrow.
Bye.